In the early hours of May 22, 2010, the quiet city of Mangalore, India, lay wrapped in darkness. The world slept, unaware that hundreds of miles away, in the skies over the Arabian Sea, a flight carrying 166 people was nearing the end of its journey and its final moments of life. Air India Express Flight 812, a Boeing 737-800, was returning home from Dubai, a familiar route flown hundreds of times before. On board were men and women who had worked for months in the Gulf, finally coming home to see their families. There were children excited to reunite with grandparents, workers carrying gifts and savings, and flight crew members beginning another routine assignment. To all of them, it was just another flight home. As the jetliner cut through the night sky, its red navigation lights shimmered faintly against the vast darkness of the Indian Ocean. Inside the cockpit, Captain Zlatko Glusica, a 55-year-old pilot of Serbian origin, sat in the left seat. A seasoned aviator, he had thousands of hours of flight experience. Beside him, First Officer H.S. Aluwalia, an experienced co-pilot from India, managed the controls and monitored the flight path. Their journey had begun hours earlier from Dubai International Airport, at 2:36 a.m. local time. The flight plan was simple: a roughly 3.5-hour journey south across the Arabian Sea, descending into the coastal city of Mangalore, a region known for its challenging terrain and short runway built atop a tabletop hill. The night was uneventful. The passengers rested, many with their eyes closed, dreaming of home. The crew served light refreshments and prepared for arrival. The aircraft cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed as dawn approached the western coast of India. Outside, a faint orange hue began to break through the horizon, signaling the first light of day. For everyone on board, this was the final stretch of a long journey. But for the crew, the most critical part was about to begin. As the Boeing 737 approached Indian airspace, the pilots began preparing for descent. The weather at Mangalore that morning was typical for the season: a light rain showers, low visibility, and a damp runway. Air traffic control cleared the flight to land on runway 24, a direction that required a tricky approach over hilly terrain, leaving little room for error. Mangalore's airport was known among pilots for its unique topography. The runway sat on a plateau, with steep slopes dropping sharply on both sides. Overshooting the runway meant plunging into a deep valley below. At 6 a.m. local time, the aircraft began its descent from cruising altitude. The flight deck was quiet except for the steady hum of engines and the occasional radio call. As they passed through 10,000 feet, visibility was moderate but not ideal. Patches of low cloud drifted across the approach path. Captain Glusica, who had recently returned from leave, appeared slightly fatigued. He had been awake for most of the night, and fatigue, though subtle, would later become a crucial factor in what was to unfold. The aircraft's systems indicated that the landing configuration should soon be prepared. The flaps were extended, the landing gear lowered, and the runway lights of Mangalore began to appear faintly in the distance. The first officer, following standard protocol, called out the approach checklist. Everything appeared normal. The Boeing 737 aligned with the glide path. Yet something was not quite right. The aircraft was slightly higher than it should have been, and its descent rate was not aligned with the precision required for a safe touchdown on a short runway. Inside the cockpit, the ground proximity warning system issued a calm reminder: sync rate, sync rate. The co-pilot called for a go-around, a standard maneuver used when the approach isn't stable. But Captain Glusica, confident they could still make it, chose to continue. The aircraft was now descending steeply, closing the distance to the runway faster than expected. The autopilot was disengaged, and manual control resumed. The rain intensified. The runway's threshold lights gleamed through the mist, and the aircraft crossed the runway threshold but not at the right position. It was nearly 2,000 feet beyond the designated touchdown zone, leaving less than half of the runway to stop. The moment the main wheels struck the wet surface, the aircraft bounced, then settled roughly back onto the ground. The sound of reverse thrust echoed through the cabin as the pilots struggled to bring the speeding jet to a halt. The aircraft raced down the slick runway at over 150 knots. The end of the tabletop plateau loomed closer with each passing second. Inside the cabin, passengers began to sense that something was wrong. Some held tightly to their seats. Others whispered prayers. The engines roared as the pilots deployed maximum braking. But the momentum was too great. The Boeing 737 hurtled toward the edge of the runway, unable to stop in time. In the cockpit, the first officer shouted for a go-around again, realizing that the remaining distance was insufficient. But it was too late. The aircraft's nose lifted slightly as the captain made a desperate attempt to steer left. In the next instant, Flight 812 overshot the runway, broke through the safety barrier, and plunged down the hillside. The massive jet tore through the terrain, splitting apart upon impact. Fire erupted almost immediately. Within seconds, the serene morning sky above Mangalore was filled with smoke and flame. In the terminal, families who had come to greet their loved ones waited anxiously as news of the crash spread. Emergency sirens wailed across the airport grounds. Firefighters and rescue teams rushed toward the dense valley below, where flames engulfed the wreckage. The scene was chaotic and heartbreaking. Among the wreckage lay fragments of lives, scattered amidst smoldering debris. The air was thick with smoke, the ground soaked with jet fuel, and cries of pain echoed faintly through the forested slopes. Of the 166 souls on board, only 8 survived. They pulled from the wreckage by rescuers who fought heat, fire, and dense vegetation. The rest perished within moments of impact. It was one of India's deadliest aviation disasters in decades, and its echoes would haunt the nation for years to come. As dawn broke fully over Mangalore, the scale of the tragedy came into focus. The charred remains of the aircraft lay in pieces, the tail section torn away, the wings embedded in the soil. Investigators from India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation and representatives from Boeing arrived soon after. What they found told a story not just of human error, but of fatigue, misjudgment, and a chain of small decisions that together led to catastrophe. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are the black boxes. They were recovered from the debris. When investigators analyzed the recordings, a chilling timeline emerged. The cockpit voice recorder captured the calm routine of the approach, followed by increasing tension as the aircraft descended. The captain's responses grew slower, more monotone, a subtle but clear indicator of fatigue. The first officer made multiple references to an unstable approach and recommended a go-around several times. But his warnings went unheeded. The captain, relying on experience and instinct, believed he could land safely. It was a fatal miscalculation. The data showed that the aircraft crossed the runway threshold at a height and speed far above normal limits. Instead of touching down within the first 1,000 feet, it landed nearly halfway down the 8,000-foot runway. Even full reverse thrust and maximum braking could not counter the laws of physics. On a dry runway, perhaps, it might have been possible to stop. But on that rainy morning, the slick surface reduced friction, and hydroplanning set in. The Boeing 737 simply could not stop before the cliff's edge. Investigators pieced together the human factors at play. Captain Glusiker had flown overnight, crossing time zones, and had been awake for over 18 hours by the time of the crash. Fatigue impairs judgment, slows reaction times, and clouds decision-making, a dangerous combination in the cockpit. Meanwhile, the first officer's repeated calls for a go-around highlighted a critical breakdown in cockpit communication and authority gradient. The co-pilot, though aware of the danger, did not assertively take control, respecting the hierarchy that often exists in aviation culture. In that hesitation lay tragedy. The investigation also examined the airport itself. Mangalore's runway was a known challenge even for experienced pilots. The tabletop design left no room for overshoot, and safety margins were tight. Despite meeting international standards, its location demanded utmost precision during every landing. When everything goes right, such an airport functions normally. But when even one variable goes wrong, speed, height, or whether other consequences can be catastrophic. The final report concluded that the probable cause of the accident was the pilot's failure to discontinue an unstabilized approach and execute a go-around, compounded by fatigue and loss of situational awareness. The report also emphasized the need for stricter monitoring of pilot rest times, better fatigue management, and reinforced training for go-around decision-making. Back in Mangalore, the aftermath left deep emotional scars. Families who had gathered at the arrival gate were instead directed to hospitals and morgues. The airport became a site of grief and mourning. Among the survivors were passengers who had been seated near the front, where the fuselage broke apart, providing a narrow escape route. Many later recalled the chaos of the fire, the cries for help, and the disbelief that moments earlier they had been descending peacefully toward home. For them, survival was both a blessing and a lifelong burden. As weeks turned into months, memorials were held across India and in Dubai. The tragedy prompted nationwide discussions about aviation safety, fatigue management, and airport design. Air India Express reviewed its flight schedules, introducing measures to prevent pilot overwork. Regulators strengthened rules on duty hours and rest periods. Pilots across the industry revisited the lesson that sometimes, the safest decision is to go around and try again. The physical scars of the crash site slowly faded, but the emotional ones did not. For the families of the 158 who perished, the memories remained vivid. The final phone calls, the unopened suitcases, the lives that ended so abruptly. Among them were stories of fathers returning after years abroad, mothers bringing gifts for children, and young workers who had just begun their dreams. Each one a life interrupted in a few tragic seconds before impact. In aviation, accidents are rarely caused by a single factor. They are the culmination of small errors, subtle misjudgments, and overlooked warnings that together form a chain. Breaking even one link in that chain can avert disaster. But on that early morning in Mangalore, every link held, leading inevitably to tragedy. The story of Flight 812 became a painful reminder of the fragility of human judgment, and the importance of vigilance, communication, and rest in the high-stakes world of flight. Years later, pilots still study the lessons of that flight. Training simulators recreate the approach to Mangalore, teaching crews to recognize when an approach becomes unstable and when to call for a go-around without hesitation. For those who survived, life took a different course, one defined by resilience and remembrance. They became living witnesses to a lesson written in fire and loss. As the years passed, Mangalore Airport was improved with better runway lighting, approach aids, and safety protocols. But the hilltop runway still stands as a silent witness to what happened that morning. Locals passing by can still see the slope where the aircraft came to rest, a reminder of the delicate balance between human control and nature's boundaries. Today, aviation is safer than ever. Technology, training, and strict regulations continue to evolve. Yet, behind every safety procedure lies a story written in tragedy. Air India Express Flight 812 is one such story, a chain of ordinary decisions that led to extraordinary loss. The passengers of that flight boarded with hope and anticipation. None could have known that their journey would end just seconds before home. As dawn broke that morning, rescue teams worked tirelessly through the smoke and debris. The sound of crackling fire mixed with the cries of the injured. The smell of burning fuel filled the air. It was a scene of heartbreak, but also of courage. Locals and responders risking their lives to save others. The survivors, pulled from the wreckage, would later describe the surreal silence that followed the crash, a silence broken only by the rain falling gently over the remains of the aircraft. In the days that followed, black ribbons and candles marked homes across India and abroad. Television screens showed images of the wreckage, the red and white tail of Air India Express resting against the hillside, twisted metal glistening in the rain. The faces of the lost stared out from photographs, turning statistics into stories. For the families, time could not heal everything. But for aviation, each tragedy is a teacher. The data, the voices, The evidence all become lessons, and those lessons save lives. From cockpit training manuals to simulator sessions, the words unstable approach go around echo as a commandment carved in memory. Air India Express 812 will always be remembered, not just for the loss, but for the change it inspired. Its story stands as a testament to the responsibility borne by every pilot, every controller, every engineer, a reminder that safety in the skies is written in the discipline of those who guard it. As night returns to Mangalore each day, aircraft still descend over the same hills, their lights flickering through the mist, their wheels touching the same runway. Passengers still look out the window, seeing the distant city lights and feeling the calm anticipation of arrival. They do not know the full story of what happened the years ago, but the systems protecting them, the procedures guiding their pilots, the lessons embedded in every checklist all carry the legacy of Flight 812. It is a story of human fallibility, of fatigue, of the thin line between control and catastrophe. It is also a story of endurance, of how aviation learns from its darkest hours. On that morning in May 2010, as the rain fell over the hills of Mangalore, 166 people shared a flight home. 8 would live to tell the story. The rest would become part of a lesson written in the history of flight, a lesson about vigilance, humility, and the seconds before impact.